last but not least, there is digital file formats. Something's really important to understand is that everybody thinks of MP3s as the digital file format, but the full bandwidth file formats are WAV, SD2, which stands for Sound Designer 2, which is what Pro Tools used to be called before it was called Pro Tools. It was called Sound Designer. So they had their own system of data file management. It was called SD2. You don't see that anymore, but that's still a full audio WAV file. I'm sorry, audio file, full quality. AIFF, which is Macintosh, it's the Apple version of a full bandwidth audio file, where a WAV file basically was designed by IBM and PC users, was the WAV file. It's become the standard in both now, but in a Mac it used to be, in the older systems of Pro Tools, like Pro Tools 3, which I had, only used SD2 files or AIFF files because it was on a Mac. You couldn't even get Pro Tools for a PC. Then they included WAV, and that becomes the standard. AU is an interesting file format. It's a full WAV file. A full bandwidth file, and it is called audio units. And audio units are going to be the future of all standardization full bandwidth audio files. The reason being is WAV files, Sound Designer files, and AIFF files have a limitation of 2 gigabytes in length. So let's say you started your recording session, and then you got a phone call in the middle of a vocal, and you were in record, and you had to run out and meet somebody at a party, and you come back, and you forgot to come out of record. You'll come back, and you'll see that your 2 gigabytes is the longest the WAV file could be, or the AIFF, or the Sound Designer file. It'll stop recording after 2 gigabytes. An audio units file can go endlessly. As long as you've got hard drive space, it'll keep creating an audio file. That's mostly useful for things like space missions where they've got to record, for years on end. Audio units is a great way to go. Or even security systems. You want it to record for 6 months without stopping. Audio units. But WAV files will stop at 2 gigabytes. So that's the full bandwidth files. The compressed type of files, we talk about compression all the time, and I'm not talking about audio compression, I'm talking about file compression. It's a different kind of compression. Don't mistake the two. They're totally different. So compressed files takes a full bandwidth audio file, which is full frequency response, and it compresses the data so that it can be transmitted over the internet, so that it can be transferred, because it's going to be a much smaller file of data. Right? We were already talking about data files being so big. Well, that's the full bandwidth files. You can take a WAV file and compress it, and there's 2 ways of compressing. There's lossless and lossy. Lossless file formats are sitting right here, right? So there's the FLAC, an SIT, a zip file that everybody's probably familiar with what a zip file is. A zip file takes the data and with a certain algorithm makes it smaller. Then you can send it to your friend over the internet. Their computer gets the zip file and knows what you did to it and reconstitutes all the data that's been taken out of it and becomes full WAV files again. So you don't lose any data. It's just like taking a basketball and taking the air out of it so you can send it through the mail, and then when it gets to the other side they blow it back up again, and it's exactly what it started like. But on the other hand, compressed lossy files basically takes data and decides what's important data and what isn't important, and it destroys the unimportant data, which they consider unimportant, and makes it smaller by throwing data away that you can never get back. One of those types of files is an MP3 file. An AAC file is what iTunes used to use and still does. The WMA is the counterpoint to the AAC file, is more of a Mac-centered compression, where a WMA is more of a PC kind of a format. So the compressed files or an MP3, once it's changed into one of those formats, it can never be brought back to full quality. But if you compress in a lossless way, it can be brought back to full quality. There's a whole plethora of different kinds of compressions that people use because they think that it's going to be the best sounding. MP3 has taken hold as being the standard, even though it may not be the best sounding. It's just the standard. And all of these companies try to come up with new compressions because they think, if I could come up with a new compression that everybody latches onto, then I'll get a royalty rate every time a computer uses it. So if you look on the internet, audio compression, and it'll tell you all of these different types. So this is a little synopsis of what we were talking about, and some examples of lossless, as we discussed. And here's some more lossless formats, and lossy compression. And a good MP3 that's compressed is 10 times smaller than the original file. So you throw away 90% of the data, and it still sounds like music. It's pretty amazing. So they do a pretty good job, even though everyone, I think, can probably hear the difference between an MP3 and a full WAV file. And then more lossy compression formats. And there's a whole bunch of them.